Today, item 5225, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and the Division of Juvenile Justice realignment, and then 5227, which is the establishment of the Board of State and Community Corrections. We have two panels. Thank you. We just got two LAO reports. We'll begin with the juvenile justice realignment. Is Finance here?
Yes.
Oh, Amy. Okay. And Mike Miner?
Yes.
Is he here? Thank you. And Tor Tarantola from the Ledge Analyst's Office. Okay. I believe that Finance is going to start with a description of the governor's proposal.
Sorry about that. Amy Jarvis with Department of Finance. In the governor's budget, we did recommend the elimination of the Division of Juvenile Justice. It was a very minimal plan by design. That was because we really wanted to work with the stakeholders and advocacy groups and the department on making sure that we implemented a successful program. We know that we are left with just about 1,000 offenders now, the most serious offenders, and we do believe that there is still some benefit of these youth serving their sentences locally. With that in mind, all we did in the governor's budget was lay out a very, very basic concept, and that was to stop intake January 1st, 2013, and that the existing offenders being housed by DJJ would slowly attrit out, knowing that their average length of stay is about 36, 38 months. And so we would be closed fully by 2015-16. Other than that, we didn't really have any other details. We did ask the legislature to appropriate $10 million in the current year, and that was primarily for planning purposes to allow the county to start preparing for these offenders returning to their communities, primarily in terms of developing an appropriate level of treatment programs, services to provide to these youth, knowing that they, most of them do have either mental health or substance abuse needs, behavioral treatment needs. So we did ask the legislature to include that. The other thing we generally discussed was the need to develop a block grant similar to the youthful offender block grant, but did not define exactly what that looked like. Again, wanted to work with our stakeholders and primarily probation, who handles this population.
So your intent is, by the May revise, to have a fleshed out proposal?
Correct, and that's because our proposal was very vague in the governor's budget. By May revision, we would expect to have more details.
If I could just say, there are a number of things in the governor's budget relating to corrections that are very vague. The committee would really appreciate it if we could see a draft as soon as a draft is ready, and be considered perhaps a stakeholder too, and talk with you a little bit about that. And that would include all the members of the committee, because it's difficult, obviously, to we don't want to get jammed up after the May revise when we only have a couple of weeks before we have to vote on the budget.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. On behalf of the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, the Division of Juvenile Justice, the Office of the Secretary, the youth and staff of the Division of Juvenile Justice, I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide you an overview of our program and current operations within the division. As I said, my name is Michael Mine. I'm the newly appointed Chief Deputy Secretary of the division. I have to say I feel extremely fortunate that I came into the then California Youth Authority in the mid-'80s when DJJ, or the California Youth Authority, had a reputation of being looked upon as a national leader in the area of juvenile treatment and rehabilitation. With changes in laws and policy over the years, DJJ lost its way and became more focused on custody and control, and lost its way regarding treatment and rehabilitation. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the type of youth that is currently in DJJ and the way that we get those youth. The youth that we receive are maybe from any 58 counties in the state. They are referred to us by the courts, either through the juvenile process or through superior court commitments. We also do superior court housing commitments, which are identified as E&M numbers. And on occasions, we're asked to house youth for diagnostic testings by the court. And we also provide emergency housing for those youth that may be in a local juvenile detention facility that need a higher level of custody and control. Once the youth have been taken into the DJJ, our intake and court services staff, they do a thorough review of the youth's file to ensure that, number one, the commitment is legal, and number two, that DJJ has the ability to provide the young person with the type of services that that individual may need. If the young person is accepted into the system, they go to one of our two clinics, reception center clinics located in Ventura County or in Stockton. At that time, they undergo a series of tests regarding their psychological assessment, psychological evaluations, academic assessment, along with their medical and a complete review of their health care needs. They're assigned a licensed casework specialist at that point. The casework specialist does a screening analysis with the youth to identify those needs, the youth's treatment needs around both the risk to recidivate as well as institutional violence and behavior. The youth is included in that process, and after the assessment is done, which runs approximately 45 days, the young man or young woman is moved into a permanent residence where they receive their treatment there. In 1995, the population in DJJ was roughly 7,600 youth. The population peaked in 1996 at approximately 10,021 youth. At that time, the DJJ ran 11 institutions and camps. With the enactment of the sliding scale in 1996, which was an incentive by the counties to keep those low-level offenders at the county level, the population started to shift some. In between 2003 and 2011, DJJ has closed 8 facilities and 4 camps. Along with that, we've reduced our staffing, which was at a high in 2006 of about 2,700 staff, down to 1,600 staff today. We continue to look for efficiencies in the department to continue to reduce costs. In 2004, the state of California entered into the Fair Consent Decree. And out of that consent decree, there were 6 remedial plans developed with the help of experts in those in particular areas of education, sex behavior treatment, ward with disability, education, health care, dental, and safety and welfare, generally your conditions of confinement. The first audit was conducted in 2008 by those experts, and the cumulative average of compliance was at 65%. I'd like to say each year preceding that, those percentages of substantial compliance have continued to increase. In 2011, we were at 83.4%. The current year of audits, which we're in mid-year audits, have shown that we've improved to 85% substantial compliance. That's a significant improvement from where we were in 2005 when the Fair Consent Decree was formalized. We've taken steps inside the division to reduce the use of violence in our facilities, to make them safer. We are using the integrated behavior treatment model, which is also part of the remedial plan, which develops a framework for treatment. We use a cognitive behavioral approach to treatment, using multidisciplinary teams to provide treatment and engaging the youth. Our goal is to use, excuse me if I may, we're taking a strength-based approach using evidence-based practices to provide services to the young folks that's in our care. Today, our population is roughly around 1,100. We have only those 707B commitments. Those are your most violent, serious offenders. And we have a cadre of young people that are in for a 290 sex offense. With the integrated behavior treatment model, we rolled out the initial programs at OH Close Youth Correction Facility in Stockton. It has shown what we consider tremendous progress and success. We are monitored constantly by the appointed court, the Office of the Special Master, along with the respective court monitors for each of the remedial plans. Our recent audits at OH Close and Tudurgeon around education was really impressive. We had 92% compliance in those areas. We've done a great deal of work. We have a very committed cadre of staff that are committed to providing the services to the most difficult population that California has to offer. I thank you for the opportunity to provide you an overview of our programs.
Thank you. LAO?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. Your staff has asked us to provide a brief overview of the issues and the recommendations. There's more detail in the background on recommendations specifically in the report I believe the sergeants distributed to you. To start with a little bit of background, I'm happy to answer any questions. As you've already heard, the population in DJJ has decreased substantially over the last few years. There's a chart of the trend line versus the county populations on page 1 of the handout, which I believe the sergeants also distributed. Currently, of all the juveniles being housed in a local or state facility in California, about 88% are housed in county facilities, the remaining 12 in DJJ. The average DJJ offender is, about 2/3 of the ones admitted in 2010-11 were admitted for an assault or robbery, about 15% for a sex offense, 6% for homicide. And counties are also taking on the responsibility currently for managing a number of more serious offenders, including homicide and sex offenders. The cost of DJJ currently to the state, outlined on page 2 of the handout, it's about $179,000 per year per ward. That has been coming down recently and should be a little bit lower in the budget year as well. Overall, we'd recommend approving a modified version of the governor's proposal. We think it has merit for a few reasons. The first of which is that counties have, we believe, a better opportunity to provide an effective and efficient model of rehabilitation for a couple of reasons. The first is that it aligns accountability with the correct level of government. That is, the counties who are responsible for early intervention and law enforcement activities would now have the responsibility for managing those youth who need to be committed in a secure facility. So they would also be bearing the costs of poor outcomes of the policies that they now put in place. We also believe the counties have more opportunity for flexibility if they're responsible for this population. So if one county felt it necessary to, for example, address gang intervention policy or put a lot of energy and resources into that area versus another county where gangs maybe aren't so prevalent, they thought it was more important to put resources into vocational training, that sort of thing. They'd have additional flexibility to do that if they had full responsibility for juvenile justice. We also believe, even though the cost savings can be determined without knowing what the level of assistance to locals would be, there's also potential for significant cost savings here because the costs to the state are pretty substantial, in part due to the feral consent decree and other factors. There's not good data on what local equivalent costs would be, but from talking to some probation chiefs, we think there is substantial savings that could be achieved, although this varies significantly from county to county. There are several issues that we've identified from talking to stakeholders in the administration. The first, as you've heard, the governor's proposal is silent on how much funding would be provided and how that would be allocated among counties. We've heard some concerns about the county's capacity to manage these more serious offenders, both in terms of physical space and programmatic capacity, providing the right types of programs for maybe more significant needs. There's also a concern that because DJJ, as you've heard, currently houses minors who are sentenced in adult court to state prison, there's an open question about who would be responsible for housing that population. And then also there might possibly be an increase in juveniles tried in adult court because DJJ has age jurisdiction up until age 25, but the locals only have jurisdiction up until age 21. So because of this difference, prosecutors might use DJJ or like having the option so they can ensure longer commitment times. And so concern is that if they don't have that option, that they might turn to the adult court system, which doesn't have that type of age limitation. We make several recommendations to address these issues. The first is coming up with an efficient and effective funding solution. This involves first finding an appropriate funding level, and we recommend that the Board of State and Community Corrections be tasked with conducting an evaluation of what a reasonable cost would be, and then the legislature basing its appropriation on that. And then the second, in deciding how to allocate between counties, we'd recommend, similar to the youth offender block grant formula, that it be based both on felony disposition share and also on the juvenile population 10 to 17. As to the capacity issue, we're recommending that the legislature direct the new board to play a role in analyzing what the county needs are, which do vary substantially from county to county, and figure out exactly what strategies would be necessary in order to help them build that capacity to deal with the new population, and also to possibly utilize leftover juvenile construction funds, which are about $68 million now, that were authorized over the last couple of years, in order to make any retrofits or modifications to current facilities that might be appropriate, and then also possibly reprioritizing some AB 900 prison construction funds that would no longer be needed given adult realignment. On the capacity issue, I think it's important to point out that there are about, on average, on any given day, about 4,500 empty beds at the county level in county juvenile facilities. That, of course, doesn't necessarily mean that they're staffed, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the space is appropriate. So to make that determination, we're recommending that the board evaluate the extent to which modifications might be necessary, or additional space or different types of space might be necessary. We also recommend the legislature adopt a comprehensive transition plan, and that involves delaying the proposed implementation date at which DJJ would stop intake from the governor's date of January 1st, 2013, delaying that by 6 months to July 1st, 2013, to give counties a full year after the Budget Act is enacted to plan for the transition. And we're also recommending that the legislature reject the $10 million proposed planning grant augmentation in the current year, because there hasn't been a plan set forth or justification for why that amount of funding is necessary for a relatively small population. And we believe that giving the counties an extra 6 months or a full year to plan would mitigate any effect that rejecting that $10 million might have. We're recommending that the BSCC play an active role, too, in providing oversight and technical assistance, including, like I mentioned, building space capacity and programmatic capacity. And then, lastly, to address the couple issues that have also been brought up, that counties be required to house offenders sentenced to state prison who are under 18, and also that in order to try and mitigate any increase in adult court filings, that the age jurisdiction for local governments be increased from 21 to 25. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the committee? I have a couple of questions. Do we know what percentage of the roughly 1,100 juveniles that we still have in DJJ would be likely to be put into adult prison? Are there estimates of that? Department, LAO, finance, anybody?
We did do an assessment just based on the age of at which they would be released, and we found that between, I think, about 10 and 25% of the juveniles in there, based only on their age of first parole consideration date, might be susceptible to being charged in adult court. That, of course, I mean, there are a lot of other factors. It's a pretty complicated set of rules and criteria.
So we're talking about 250 persons, roughly in that category. If it was 25% of 1,100, I'm just, are you actually kind of seriously proposing that we might look at having one new facility, either in the adult system or a remaining state juvenile facility, possibly built with AB 900 money for these sort of tweener inmates.
You mean for the juvenile sentenced in adult court?
Well, I'm thinking about for the juveniles that might be likely to simply be tried as adults and go to adult prison.
Yeah. We're recommending that the state not play a role in that and that require counties to house juveniles who are under 18 and sentenced to prison. There was an effort...
No, I'm thinking about the ones that are 18 to 25.
No, we're recommending that the entire juvenile population be realigned to the counties and the DJJ be eliminated.
Okay, so could you just briefly, again, what is your recommendation regarding the possibility of a number of these young people being tried as adults and going to adult prison, and what would happen there?
Right. Well, the law does require certain types of the most serious offenders be tried in adult court. Majority of them are discretionary. So we're recommending that the age jurisdiction for local juvenile management be increased from age 21 to age 25 to match the age jurisdiction that DJJ currently has. And we think that that would mitigate the potential increase in juveniles tried as adults.
Okay. Senator Wolf.
I have a slightly different track here. I want to ask, when the governor brings forward his proposal at the revise, one of the things that I'm going to be very much interested in is how are we going to be able to know if this realignment to the local level is successful or not? And that means that we have to have some, perhaps we have to strengthen the state and community corrections task of answering that question along with the counties. But that's what I'm really interested in, because at the end of the day, we're making this change, and we think that it will be better in the long run. It's not just a budget change, but should provide a better outcome. So I'm really interested when this plan comes back from the governor that we have more detail. And again, the LAO, I've mentioned this several times, we really do need to have some focused attention on analysis and evaluation and what's the state role going to be in figuring out whether we've made the right decision or not. And, we need more, in all the areas. I'm not sure that we have enough personnel and time in the departments to be able to handle that without more guidance. So that's what I'm going to be looking at. And I hope the LAO is going to look at that in more detail.
Sure.
I think we're all going to have to, and that really relates to the second part of this hearing, which is the Board of State and Community Corrections and what is actually being done, since July 1st is coming fast. And we really do need to plan well and plan in a timely way. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to panel 2. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope you'll stick around because there may be more questions. Daniel McClare from the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice. David Steinhardt, the Director of the Commonweal Juvenile Justice Program, and Linda Penner, Chief Probation Officer of Fresno County. Welcome.
Probation is always disrespected. This is
I'm going to help probation.
No. You are the heroes of this story. So, thank you very much. We're going to have some comments from the field on the governor's proposal, and we'll start with Mr. McClare.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators. First of all, my name is Dan McAleer. I am the Executive Director of the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice. We're based in San Francisco. We're a nonpartisan organization. I also teach in the Department of Criminal Justice Studies at San Francisco State. I've been around this issue for many years. I came here with some prepared statements, but I think I'm going to stray from them because after hearing from the LAO and the Department of Finance, we're pretty much in agreement with the positions taken by the governor and by the LAO. I think that for a number of reasons. I mean, particularly right now, given the current state of the California budget, California can no longer afford to operate dual juvenile justice systems. This year, we're going to spend, in this year's budget, we're going to spend $226 million on the Division of Juvenile Justice for less than 1,000 kids. And as the LAO pointed out, the amount we're spending per capita is about 175. Well, they hope to reach 175,000 a year ago. It was about 235,000, and what we're getting for that is somewhat in question. The state is under a consent decree. It has been under a consent decree since November of 2004. There is no end in sight right now for that consent decree. And one of the reasons for that, and the primary reasons, is that of the 3 state institutions that remain, all of them must be replaced under the consent decree. So the state will have to build new facilities. Now, we've got facilities that were badly designed in the first place there's a general consensus on that. Of the 3 facilities that were left, one was opened in 1916, another one, O.H. Close, was opened in 1968, and then the last one was the Shadarian that was opened in 1991. The facilities are literally falling down. The electrical systems, the plumbing systems are unraveling. The Ventura Institution, it was reported not long ago that the wastewater was backing up into the drinking water, creating just abominable conditions. So the state has to do something. And as we heard from the LAO, the fact is that the counties have sufficient institutional capacity. We agree that about the point that it may not be always the ideal type of institutions, or it may not fit with some notions of what the ideal institutions may be. But I want to point out, since the late 1990s, the counties have engaged in an extensive building boom. New juvenile facilities, new county ranches and camps. These are high security and medium security institutions and minimum security institutions. So you have a broad array of institutional options available at the county level. Now, not all counties are the same. I think we're all in agreement with that. There are huge disparities when you look across the state's 58 counties. Many counties have relied heavily on DJJ commitments. Other counties hardly at all. The counties that have relied the least frequently on DJJ commitments have been those that have developed their county infrastructures and that can provide that array or that continuum of services at the county level. Also, and most importantly, in terms of correctional policy, best correctional policy, what the counties can do and the state can't is provide that rich array, not just of institutional options, but most importantly, the community-based interventions. Because it's the community-based interventions that ultimately determine whether someone is going to succeed or not when they come back into the community. The state does not have the capacity. It had limited capacity before. It has no capacity now to provide community-based interventions. The counties can tap into funding streams that the state cannot, including Medicaid, mental health funding, wraparound funding. We have seen many counties that have experimented extensively in implementing utilizing these funding streams and have developed very extensive, well-integrated services at the county level. And that's the direction that California needs to go. This is the juvenile justice system of the 21st century. We cannot continue to reach back into the models of a century ago. So from the standpoint of my organization, we support the governor's position. We support the points laid out by the legislative analysts. We do strongly subscribe to the idea that the state must have a role, but a role that does not include running institutions, which ironically was the vision of 1941 when the Youth Corrections Authority Act was first passed. And then once they took over the institutions, because of scandals back then in the state institutions, suddenly the emphasis shifted away from developing county capacity to maintaining institutions at the state level, and it failed. So we need to. I'd like to see us go back to that original vision of 1941, and where the state plays a primary role of providing technical assistance to the counties to help the counties to develop their individual capacity, helping them facilitate the regional collaborations, doing the necessary monitoring and evaluation and funding that does need to occur. Because, as I said, there are some counties that are doing quite well and have developed really models that would that conform to the best things happening around the country. But there's other counties that are not, and those counties we need to look to. So sustained funding. So we recommend that the closure date be pushed back from I think it was this year back to 2015 or 2016 to give time for planning. I think you have to move to close the Ventura facility. I think that the state is going to pour a lot of money into an outdated facility just to maintain its current operations, and I don't think it'll yield any long-term benefit to the state fiscally or programmatically. I think you should establish a planning capacity, a fund for planning capacity, and also partner with private foundations. There is an effort statewide among some of the major foundations to develop a technical assistance strategy to help some of the counties develop their capacity. And so there's movement statewide, not just here within the capital, but around the state. And I think that we want to capitalize on that, move things forward, and I think that we can take California into the 21st century.
Thank you. I think we'll be hearing from one of those efforts later today, actually, too. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much. My name is David Steinhardt. I'm the director of the Commonweal Juvenile Justice Program. My involvement goes way back with this committee in helping to design SB 81, the 2007 reform, the 2009 accountability amendments. I served on the State Juvenile Justice Commission. And so I have some experience as a designer and planner of the realignment reforms that have already been adopted for the Division of Juvenile Justice. And I really want to focus in the few minutes I have today on some options for the committee and the governor to consider as possible reforms, things that can be done. You're really kind of, as a legislature, caught in some crossfire here because you have, on the one hand, recommendations to shut DJJ down, either now or later. And on the other hand, you have the county voice, which we are about to hear, and probation saying, no way, we're not going to go for that. And so politically, we're pretty much headed for gridlock on the issue. My sort of idea or notion here is that there is a middle ground in which practical action can be taken sooner rather than later without force-feeding all of these difficult cases to the counties or engendering more opposition, but also getting down the road towards a stronger realignment and toward building county capacity. We really do want to move on. We don't want to get stuck. We want to find some way to build county capacity. And we want counties to get beyond the position they're in now, saying, no, we can't handle these cases. They have to stay at the state with all the flaws and costs of keeping them at the state. I think one thing to keep in mind, and this number always surprises me, is that the number of juvenile commitments to the Division of Juvenile Justice now is down to 330 kids per year, 330. The population is close to 1,000 because they stay for so long and there's some kids in there headed for prison. But you would think that with that number, in a state that has over 4 million kids aged 10 to 17, that we would be able to make some progress toward a community corrections model, a youth community corrections model that's better than what we have. So I want to just take a very brief few minutes to suggest two middle ground options for progress. And I do want to conclude very briefly, Senator Hancock, to address in just a little more detail your concern about the adultification of the caseload and the threat of having many more young people wind up in state prison if we do this the wrong way. One middle ground option. Last year in AB 109, we came close. We had a plan in one of the budget bills that was an opt-in and buyback plan, whereby a realignment pot of funds would be created, and counties would get those funds to develop their capacity. But for counties that couldn't handle these tough kids, the option to buy back space in DJJ would be available, and those realignment funds would either be withheld or returned to the state. So this discounts the county objection that we can't do it on the one hand. It's voluntary in nature. On the other hand, for counties that can go with the plan and make progress, it's an opportunity to move forward. There's not time to go into the details of that. The plan was pulled out of the budget because finance and the administration were very concerned that contracting back with the state would lead to a problem in planning the size and operational cost of DJJ. But I think that's a problem that can be worked out, and I think the opt-in plan is a mid-range plan that deserves further attention. Another, very briefly, a plan that's middle ground and doable is a step-down plan. And I've had some discussions with folks in the administration about possibly doing this. This would start by looking at the very long stays that kids have in DJJ, which way over the national average. Even though they're serious offenders, they're staying 3.5 years. The idea would be to normalize that stay down to about 2 years. That immediately produces a lower population and savings at the state, but not then to let go of those cases. The realignment funding saved at the state would go to counties to incentivize reentry programming and other kinds of community connections that these young people would have. And really that's where the hard work needs to be done, not just in what we do institutionalizing them at the state level, but in making sure that they become good citizens after they're released. Both of these plans are voluntary on the part of counties, make progress down the road toward community corrections, and are probably doable. The question is, how do you jumpstart them? A lot of the discussion has been kind of rush to judgment realignment, and that's very hard to do. This is a very complex population. So I would echo what LAO has recommended, that the next step be some kind of planning process, and the agency of choice, if only by default here, would be the Board of State and Community Corrections. So I agree that it would make sense to hand them the assignment of analyzing county capacity and ability to go along with one of these make progress plans. And I also want to say that that should be a discussion that engages all stakeholders, including prosecutors, because the next point I want to make is that if you don't safeguard against having these cases flow to counties and right back to state prison, then realignment will be a failure, and prosecutors need to be engaged in coming up with solutions that allow them to elect using the juvenile system versus adult court. So, and the $10 million, I wouldn't reject that idea out of hand. I think that is useful planning money. We need counties to go beyond just saying no to this and to come up with concrete plans, gap analyses, and facility needs, performance outcome measures need to be in it, as Senator Walk has mentioned, and I think that planning money could be put to good use. And so my final comment here has to do with adult court. A real and present danger of realignment here done badly is that these young people now in DJJ or going there in the future will wind up in state prison serving very long sentences. And in terms of cost savings, this is a backfire, because if they serve the full adult term in the state prison and pile up there, then we're incurring a state cost that I don't think has been thoroughly analyzed so far, and that may wipe out the savings we're seeking at DJJ. All of these young people, with the exception of a few sex offenders, are automatically eligible for filing in adult court. They are in DJJ and going to DJJ only because the DA has made an election to use the juvenile justice system with its age 25 jurisdiction. LAO has pointed out that The local options, if we cancel DJJ for prosecutors, are nil. And I would say that the estimate that they came up with, which was actually 40 to 90 young people per year based on the flow into DJJ, would turn up in adult prison. I'd say that's an underestimate, and that it would be more like probably 200 per year if we don't use safeguards against this. So my recommendation is that any DJJ realignment plan must seriously take into account the consequence of turning juvenile offenders into long-term adult prisoners. And there are a number of mechanisms that would work here. Raising the age of jurisdiction above 21, maybe not to 25, is one. We also need more sanctions that are available locally for these more serious offenders after they become 18 and can no longer be mixed in the juvenile facilities that we have. And then, we also might consider looking at counties that take the money and run, so to speak. If their rates of direct files go way up in a realignment context, then some sliding scale penalties for exceeding certain adult court commitment rates would make sense. So that's about it for now. I would just conclude by saying that it is possible to make progress on this front. We don't have to be caught between a political rock and a hard place on this and end up in gridlock doing nothing, and I think the options are worth exploring.
Ms. Penner.
Good morning. Linda Penner, Chief Probation Officer from Fresno County. I am the most recent past president of the Chief Probation Officers of California, and at risk giving away my age, this is my 34th year in probation departments and my 7th year as the chief in Fresno County. And I tell you that because in that capacity, I've had the privilege of working with the state of California on the agenda that realigned 75% of DJJ back to the locals. It was a cooperative working relationship. I believe that while we had areas of disagreement, we generally came to some mutual aid, and we've moved 75% of the youth back to us. Also had a front row seat this year in AB 109, where we took over 49% of a CDCR population and are managing that population. So as you well know, I'm not telling you anything out of school, but I think it needs to be reiterated here. We first accepted the non-DJJ back into our capacity in the juvenile system. We then took back parole, and we have managed that. And I'm pleased to tell you right now, there's an invisible line in that population at the locals. We have agreed with the administration, we have worked with the legislators in order to fashion very precise decisions that serve the minors in our care and custody. For the first time, I stand before you representing the chiefs and tell you that there is a unanimous vote that we are opposed to the closure of DJJ. And while I'm hearing a lot about money and a lot about facilities that need to be built, I'm telling you it is a proposition that does not serve the minors in the state of California well. I think, first of all, the state would be one of the first to do away with their state institutions for youthful offenders. I think we should compliment ourselves for the population that we have dispensed out of DJJ. And I'm here to tell you that the population that is in DJJ belongs in DJJ for a number of reasons. They are a very seriously mentally ill population, a seriously violent population, a sex offender population that cannot be served efficiently by the locals. I tell you that because what you see is an economy of scale in DJJ. You see young people that have like needs that can be managed in an organization that is funded and able to do that. If you piecemeal that population back to the locals, I think you've made a failed attempt at a best practice that will not serve us well. And while I respectfully agree with a lot of what the individuals have said here today about the good work that probation does, if you move forward with this closure, you are basically hampering all of our best efforts from stem to stern, in my opinion. Because what we run now are facilities where we manage all of the young people that we can keep in our custody. I was looking at the census in Fresno today to bring this down to sort of a macro level. We have 340 young people in custody today. 190 of those are pre-sentence or detained minors. Out of those right now, I think our census shows that I have 20 young people pending murder charges. And I'm here to tell you that that is a very difficult population to manage. It is a very difficult population to mix. It is a difficult population to serve in that their needs are very great. And so when we move them through the system and they go to DJJ, I think that the resources are there to do what needs to be done. Locals have served you well. The juvenile justice impacts in the state of California have demonstrated to all of us that those crime rates are declining and have done so since really JJCPA, when you started to fund us for prevention and intervention and let us move those interventions through youth YOBG funding and those sorts of things. And we've managed it well. I think we've served you well. This movement, with the opposition universally of every chief in the state of California, I think should also say something to you. And that is, we know what we do. We're close to the ground. We've done a good job of what you've charged us to do. And when we put our hand up and say no, it is not out of disrespect, but out of concerns that there will be some unintended consequences here that none of us want. And I'll close with that.
Senator Wolf had a question.
Ms. Penner, I had a question. Looking at the LAO's figures on page 12, which describe the county by county, the total capacity population in the DJJ wards, there's a real difference among counties.
Yes.
Does one size fit all here? I mean, I can see if you have, 30, 40, more than that. But some counties have none. Some counties have 2 or 3. Does it make a difference?
Well, I mean, the counties are as diverse as everyone knows. I think at the end of the day, for instance, on AB 109, we have some people that have this year 2 people coming back from prison to be dealt with realignment. I think the juvenile justice population is similar to that. I come from a jurisdiction that is more conservative. We are the Central Valley. We are what we are. At the same time, last year, during a census that we did, I had 23 young people in for murder. We have high unemployment. We have a very exceptional poverty rate. Unfortunately, we have a number of things going on in our community that lead us to be a bit ahead of the class in terms of consumers. Factually, high metropolitan areas, very often, at the end of the day, when you've exhausted all your local alternatives or the crime itself takes you to another juncture, we have to manage that. With that said, to do away with that alternative factually doesn't help the minors at that end of the spectrum, because you could not expect the locals to be able to roll out the kind of programs associated with those high-end needs that could be done bit by bit, county by county.
Actually, I do have a follow-up question to that, and perhaps any of the rest of you could answer it. And that is something that has come up in terms of both the adult and the juvenile populations as we look at realignment, which is what appears to be the much greater use of state prison by some counties than others. And the same is true for DJJ. And looking at the charts that the LAO showed us, I mean, Fresno actually is one of the 5 highest, as you know. Other counties that are equally populated, one of the counties I represent, Alameda County, which also has a great deal of poverty and crime rate, et cetera, is quite different. And the argument has been advanced that the entire state is picking up the costs for counties that have chosen to use state prison as an alternative, and that one of the advantages of realignment, especially if it's accompanied with funding, is that it will encourage everyone to take responsibility for their kids, hopefully at an earlier point in the trajectory, so that we don't have so many adults and young people in prison.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And if you don't mind, since Fresno was raised, I'm taking it.
And I mean it very respectfully. I really we're trying to grapple with why these things are happening.
I actually think there's a couple of things that are going on. One is we all know the state of California is diverse, and so there are areas of the state that are, certainly more conservative, more liberal, and that may be one caveat to the question you asked. But beyond that, I think that what Joan Petrocelia from the Bay Area would tell you, that a couple of things happened, and they happened in areas where maybe the tax base was not as generous, or the community was not as generous with their use of the tax base to the justice system or to the probation department. And I'm telling you, I'm a probation chief, and I believe in rehabilitation and programs and what it takes. But what Joan will tell you is when the locals stopped being funded back in about 1996, what you saw was the prison rate go up, and the crime rate stay static, and the locals began to use prison as an alternative based on lack of programming locally. Now, that wasn't the right way to do business, and I absolutely could not defend that. But and even then, I wasn't smart enough to know what they were doing in '96 to the locals. But here we are in the face of realignment on the adult side, and we've completed most of the juvenile, and I think some counties are not high users. And I think a system that has incentives included in it is absolutely in our future. With that said, I have a workload commensurate with what we've done in our past. And in order to be successful, I have to be able to successfully create programs that impact that workload. As of today, I have just under 900 post-release community supervision guys back in my community. I am struggling to get programs up and running so that I don't reintroduce them back into CDCR. So you have the argument, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Kudos to the Bay Area. I think they've done a great job, and Wendy and I have had this conversation more than once. But with that said, I can't be successful unless I'm adequately funded.
Very quickly on this, plainly there are big high sender counties to DJJ, and 10 counties are responsible for 72% of the current population, many of them large counties. 7 of those counties appear on the list of counties that send the most per rate of population and the most per rate of felony adjudications. So there are disparate practices when counties oversend to the Division of Juvenile Justice for whatever reasons. They get kind of a financial free ride, and there's an unfairness factor in that. Now, we can address that either by incentivizing those counties to change their practices or by penalizing. The penalty approach worked in 1996 with sliding scale on the lower level offenders and dropped commitments dramatically because that free ride was canceled pretty much by the penalty. But I think that that some attention does need to be paid to the high sender counties, the high users of DJJ, and that it's just not fair to let that continue without a combination of incentives and, in the long run, penalties for continuing to do that.
Senator, you're essentially punishing the counties that are keeping their kids local. And the issue of county disparity, and I'm not disparaging any counties, and I agree, there are different practices in place and histories and routines and so on. But the issue of disparity has been something that this body, the California legislature, has struggled with since the 1940s. That was the reason why the California Youth Authority was created, because of the disparate commitment rates coming from different counties to the state-run institutions at the time. It was the reason for probation subsidy in the 1960s. It was the county-by-county disparities. It came up during the SB 81 hearings in 2007. I think it's an issue that needs to be addressed. I think, and unfortunately, because of the budgetary crisis right now, we can't maintain a state institution solely for the matter of convenience. I think that the counties, I've traveled the state and I've looked at what some of the counties are doing, and really the seeds of innovation right now in juvenile justice in California is occurring at the county level. Some of the secure options that are available. San Bernardino County, San Francisco County, Santa Clara County. It's not just the Bay Area, Linda. Humboldt County. They've developed very, very good model that other counties can borrow from. And I think this is going to be the incubators of reform. So as we move forward, and we're not calling for closure today, but as we move forward, I think that one of the central issues is how do we develop a system where kids in Fresno County or Lake County or wherever, or San Francisco County, get treated in a similar manner. You should not be subject to different treatment based upon your geographical location.
If I could just respond, because I think we need to get back on target, which is factually 58 chiefs voted unanimously that the closure was a detriment to the programs we currently run. And I invite you to Fresno. You haven't been there. I have a state-of-the-art facility. I am pleased to tell you we run a core of the Boys and Girls Club out of my facility. We run young people to junior college. We graduate an enormous amount of people from college. We have 40 beds inpatient drug treatment in my facility, and I challenge anybody to come take a look. We are not in the backwoods. I got this to tell you, but I'm telling you right now, we have a crime rate commensurate with our commitments to DJJ. We're not throwing these young people away. They are individuals that have triaged through the system to a juncture where the alternatives locally are not available to them. And I think that's what you're hearing from 58 chiefs. I think that all of us are running good programs. And I think it is, and I don't want it to become polarized in terms of the Central Valley versus the Southern or the state. I recently was at a Beyond the Bench where they were talking lots and lots about programs that were going on all about in the Bay Area. And I challenged everybody to take a trip. Go to San Diego. They even have a beach. Fresno, we have Yosemite. I promise to take you if you come take a look. But at the end of the day, chiefs all over the state are running meaningful programs with outcomes. You've challenged us all along to tell you what we're doing with your money, how we're doing it. And I think the big picture is that we've reduced juvenile impacts to the system. And I'm pleased to be able to sit here and tell you that. This juncture is one that we all look at and say, first of all, we're not ready. It is not the economy of scale you want for these young people. You want them somewhere where you get them the best services and you do the best job. And I personally think DJJ is well on their way to doing that. I don't think they should be thrown out with the bathwater. Beyond that, I think you have to recognize the fact that we're not saying no just because we want to say no. We've said yes, 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 yes. This is your first no from the chief probation officers. And I am obstinate personally, but our organization is not. So I hope you hear that loud and clear.
Thank you. I think this is probably just the beginning of this discussion. And it's not only prisons, I can tell you. There are counties that invest in themselves and counties that do not. And increasingly, we hear up here, pleas for more state support from counties who say, but we're so poor, and we don't tax ourselves because our people are conservative. At some point, we have to pool our money to buy the things, whether they're juvenile detention facilities or parks or universities that none of us can afford to buy separately, and how we equitably deal with that in a 58-county situation. And when the state does need to come in and pick up for counties that, as you said, I think it was a very good phrase, locals aren't as generous or something, or whether at some point everybody has to deal with their own problems then, and maybe there'll be a search for more effective solutions. It's a big issue. And actually, I would love to come and see your facility because it sounds really good. We've been going around and visiting as many as possible, and I'd like to take you up on that, and I'll invite both members of the committee in case they're available to come, and also some of our public safety committee members and other people who are very interested in getting a deeper understanding of these issues. I guess what I would say right now, just to LAO and finance and the department, is formulas are going to matter here, because I understand the immediate problem of counties that have been high users, but then we don't want to lock that into a formula. We do need over time to have incentives, and I believe in incentives too. I'd much rather have incentives to share best practices and bring about some kinds of changes. So any help that we can get from your organizations would be very valued. I had just one other quick question. Somebody mentioned closing Ventura, and we did get reports recently, very recently, of some really negative situations in Ventura. And I wondered if anybody had comments on that. What are we doing as a department to deal with the stories that have recently made the press?
Yes, Madam Chair. I think that, first of all, there's been a tremendous amount of progress at Ventura.
Could you speak it? I'm sorry, into the microphone.
There's been a tremendous amount of progress at Ventura Youth Correctional Facility. We hired a new superintendent on January, the first part of January, and that superintendent has brought a high degree of leadership at that facility. With the closure of Heman G. Stark and the closure of Preston Youth Correctional Facility in early 2011, that impacted that facility significantly because of the transition of the youth into that population. We've since hired, we have a fully staffed facility there now where they have been running a high vacancy rate. Along with the new superintendent, we've hired teachers. We've put in additional treatment space for delivery of education. A recent education audit was conducted a few weeks back. I'm expecting that report will show that there's been significant improvement in the area of education, probably around the high 80s as far as substantial compliance. We are monitoring closely the facility's violence level. We have what we call the program service day, where we daily look at the amount of time youth are coming out of rooms. One of the criticisms was young people are not getting out of rooms as per policy.
Well, solitary confinement.
They were called solitary confinement. I like to say DJJ went away from the 23-1 several years ago. That's where youth were confined in their rooms 23 hours a day and out 1 hour a day. Mm-hmm. The minimum by policy that a young person can remain in their room is 21 hours a day. That's if they're on their worst behavior. But our expectation is that all youth out of their room, 70 to 80% of their working hours between the hours of 6 a.m. in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. We monitor those hours very closely. I can say that the facility has made considerable improvement in those areas. If we look at the average hours that youth are out of their rooms a day, we're up in the high 60s, and some living units up in the high 70s. We have the biggest problem at the facility was on their 2 behavior treatment programs. That's where the highest violent youth were housed. What we have realized is that those youth are the ones that are in the greater need of treatment. The higher the risk, the more the treatment. And so we're focusing on those living units, and there's been considerable improvement. Actually, we have the plaintiffs are at Ventura today, along with the Office of the Special Master, looking at the improvements that's been made. And my expectation is that we'll get a positive report out of that facility.
A positive report, like when are they due?
Well, there will actually be a written report. What I expect is that the Office of Special Master will tell us things that she sees at the facility that may need improvement, and I'm sure the plaintiffs will be also provide that type of information. We have a case management conference scheduled for April the 19th in Alameda County with the judge and the PLO, where we'll go through the findings based on the recent report from the Office of the Special Master, which is still in draft form, but speaks in detail about the improvements that's been made at the facility.
Okay. Would you make sure that the legislature gets a copy of that?
Yes, I
The
will.
committee staff, and they'll share it with us?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee? If not, we are not going to take action on this today because there isn't enough detail in the proposal. And we're looking for that by the May revise, but we have requested a draft proposal as soon as you have one, because it's going to be important that the legislature have a chance to actually read, absorb, and ask any questions that we might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What I'm going to do is move on directly now to item number 2, the establishment of the Board of State of Community Corrections, because it's such an integral part of this whole discussion, how it functions and how soon we can get it up and running and what kind of leadership it's going to have really are going to be critically important. Then I'll take comments from the public on both of these topics. So moving on, we do have, again, we have 2 panels. Andrea Sharper from the Department of Finance, Robert Takeshita. Takeshita, okay. So, from the Corrections Standards Authority, and again from the LAO. Finance?
Madam Chair, members, Andrea Sharfer with the Department of Finance. The Board of State and Community Corrections was established in legislation enacted as part of the 2011 budget that abolished the Corrections Standards Authority, or CSA, within the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, established the new board effective July 1st, 2012 as an independent entity, and consolidated various other public safety programs within the new board. Specifically, beginning in 2012-13, the board will assume responsibility for all local public safety programs previously administered by CSA relating to facility standards and operations, training, and planning and grants. The board will also assume responsibility for the burn JAG, Justice Assistance Grants, residential substance abuse treatment, and California gang intervention and prevention programs previously administered by the California Emergency Management Agency. In addition to assuming responsibility for those existing programs, the new board, as you've already mentioned, will be a key leader in providing leadership, coordination, data collection, and technical assistance related to California's adult and juvenile criminal justice systems. The governor's budget includes the transfer of existing programs from CSA and CalEMA to the board, and includes an additional transfer of $8.9 million from CDCR to assist counties in their realignment planning and training efforts. In total, the board's budget will consist of $109.2 million and 75.5 positions in 12-13, increasing to $116.9 million and 81 positions in 15-16, once all of the currently open CalEMA grants have been closed out and transferred to the board. And Bob Takeshita, as you've already noted, is here, and he can explain the efforts that have taken place so far to prepare for the transfer of programs to the board. And we also have staff from CalEMA and CDCR here if you have questions for the individual departments.
Yes. We're very interested in how planning is moving forward.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee this morning. And I know you're interested to hear what we've done to date. So I'll just give you kind of a brief overview of what we've done as staff, as CSA staff, as the transition to the BSCC. Currently, we are working with the California State Sheriff's Association in the development it would be a supplement to the survey that we currently administer, which is the jail profile survey. And these will be questions specific to realignment, dealing with the new sentencing provisions, dealing with the post-release community supervision, and then also any sort of parole revocations. So that is currently being worked on, developing these data elements. We will administer that as part of the jail profile survey. So we'll be gathering that type of realignment information. We're also working with the California probation officers, the chief probation officers of California. They will be administering their own survey, but they will be sharing that realignment information with us. So we will have that data. We're currently in the process of doing that. We're at the state level, we're currently working with a number of different groups, including California Forward, where we've been attending a number of conferences, symposiums, and meetings, trying to get a sense of what type of information is being gathered. So from a short-term perspective, specifically evidence-based programs, practices that are currently where information is being gathered, we're trying to gather all this information as best we can. And in addition to that, obviously, the legislative requirement that we would come back to the legislature with a report in 2013 and outlining on the community corrections partnership program. So we will be working with some private entities. They are currently in the process of doing some evaluation on some of the data elements. We will be getting that. Internally, we're working on developing a report on how we would take this information and present it to the legislature in 2013 in addition to that. Also, the CSA board in January, they appointed an executive steering committee to come up with some recommendations, identify issues and concerns for the new BSCC once they are constituted and meet in session. So as part of that group, it was expanded to include some advocates, a lot of county officials in the development of this. In addition, they met on February 22nd. We will have a second executive steering committee on April 4th, and the executive steering committee has been expanded to include representatives from the Administrative Office of the Courts, as well as the public defender, the district attorney, and some other advocates as well. So with the idea of bringing back this list of information to the CSA board on May the 10th, and it will be presented in public hearing, and then this information will be prepared for the new BSCC once it's constituted, as well as all the other information that we've gathered regarding realignment, regarding the elements that could possibly be collected in regards to best practices, as well as everything we can gather for their decisions so they can move forward on their policy issues. So that's essentially where we're at to date, as well as working with CalEMA, the transfer programs that Finance had referred to. We're trying to make this as seamless as possible for the counties so there's no disruption to any of the programs that we currently administer, as well as programs that will transfer that we will be responsible for.
Okay. I think that I was a little confused about this list of activities, if I could just say so. The new board is a totally different board.
That's correct.
So you're phasing out, somebody's taking responsibility for phasing the new board, which is going to be independent of CDCR and CalEMA. I'm assuming it's an easier transition here because we're talking about a grant program moving, essentially. How is that coming? Or is the department not the people to ask? Is it the LAO or finance?
Well, I would definitely say that CalEMA and CSA have been working as hard as possible to stay connected with all of those resources, like they mentioned, CPOC, the sheriffs, California Forward, to really stay in the know on the issues and to be able to prepare a package with recommendations, including all of the data that is being collected once the new board is appointed.
Okay, and who's got the timeline for that, and where is that occurring? I understand there isn't even a mission statement for the new board developed yet, and so where are we in this process?
And if I may, the executive director has yet to be appointed. We hope that announcement will be made very soon. And part of it has been because CSA is still within corrections, but is to be a separate entity that reports directly to the governor July 1st, there has been some transition issues that we've had to work out. But some of them really can't be addressed until that executive director is in place and determines with all of the goals and missions laid out in the language that established the board, that they take all of that into consideration and make sure that the board is comprised of everything that the legislature anticipated when they pass that legislation. So there are definitely transitional issues that we're working on, and some of them can't be addressed until an executive director is in place.
Is there a time frame for appointing an executive director? I'm just concerned because July 1st is, it seems a couple of months away, but as you know, time passes quickly.
And I don't deal directly with that appointment process, but I think it is relatively soon.
Okay, thank you. LAO, did you have any comments?
Sure. Madam Chair, members, Tor Tarantula with the legislative analysts. Your staff asked us to provide an overview of some of our concerns, which I can go into now if you'd like.
Yes.
And then answer any questions.
Yes, that would be good.
So, as you've heard, the BSCC, which was created by SB 92 last year, took not only some responsibilities from CSA and some grant administration from CalEMA, but also added some responsibilities that the new board would be responsible for, namely providing statewide leadership, coordination, technical assistance, some data and research functions. And we're concerned that in the budget year, with adult realignment well underway, that the governor's budget hasn't provided any additional resources. And it looks like in this timeline, additional resources for these important functions won't be provided until the 2013-14 budget. As you've heard, about 67 positions are being transferred from CDCR for grant administration and CSA's current oversight functions, and then a few positions from CalEMA for grant administration. But the draft organizational chart provided us by the department, for example, doesn't contemplate these important new functions, and there aren't any positions or any funds provided in the budget to provide resources for research and data, which we think is especially important beginning in the budget year, given the context of adult realignment that's already started and will be continuing, obviously, in the budget year. In a recent report, we made a couple recommendations in how to better define the board's role and its activities. And the state obviously has a significant public safety interest in measuring the impact of realignment as soon as possible and being able to evaluate the county's ability to adapt to this new caseload. And this is important also for the state's policymakers' interests, and also to ensure that locals are held accountable for the success of their programs. And so we've recommended that the legislature more clearly define the board's role, specifically by directing the board to provide technical assistance to counties, serving as a knowledge base for best practices and current research, and also to help structure local accountability systems by collecting accurate, reliable outcome data in a consistent way so that they can be compared between counties, and so we have a good accountability structure in place. And so this requires an active conversation, obviously, with the legislature and the administration, the department, and the county stakeholders about what specifically the counties would benefit from and what the state's interests would benefit from and what this looks like in terms of activities, and then deciding what types of resources would be required for the board to actually provide that to the counties and to the state. So we think this falls mainly in two categories, the first being the board's role in research and data. So, for example, some specific activities might include helping decide what the appropriate outcome metrics are for the counties to provide and measure, and doing this in a consistent way so that when you get a certain set of data from one county, you can compare it to another, and that gives you some meaningful comparison and ability to evaluate counties' performance relative to one another. designing or providing data collection systems, conducting research, contributing scholarship to best practices, aggregating, disseminating data so that it's available to the public and to policymakers. And then in terms of their role in technical assistance, depending on what the legislature thinks an appropriate role for the state would be and what the local government's needs are, this could be something, well, not quite simple, but something like running a website that provides a clearinghouse of data and current research to help counties, to give them a point of access for important information to help develop their programs. Or it could go a little bit further, providing actual training to local officials, running seminars to update officials on best practices, assisting them with implementation, things like that. But all of these responsibilities require new resources, and we're concerned that the administration hasn't contemplated these responsibilities in the budget year in providing its budget proposal. And so we've identified a couple options. I want to stress these aren't our recommendations, just a couple options that the legislature could consider in providing resources. Fall in generally in two strategies: redirecting other staff to maintain total cost neutrality, and then another general strategy would be just augmenting resources and making an additional appropriation. Some options for redirecting staff would include moving the Department of Justice's Criminal Justice Statistics Center to the new Board of State and Community Corrections, or at least some of the vacancies that they have at DOJ for that center. Another option, convert some of the Correction Standards Authority's vacancies. We understand they have a relatively high number of vacancies currently. Redirecting those or converting them to realignment-related positions. Another option would be move some of CDCR's current research positions, which haven't been reduced in to adjust for adult realignment. And then in terms of possible augmentation or appropriation of additional resources, because redirecting might, obviously one of the trade-offs would be affecting the programs that those staff are moved from. So in terms of augmentation, if new resources were appropriated specifically for this, they might be offset by some of the savings we've recommended in public safety, one being $20 million in savings from inmate pharmaceuticals, $10 million in current savings by rejecting the DJJ planning grants, $8.9 million in savings from our recommendation to reject the community corrections plan funding in the budget year. And then there might also be a role for the state and the counties to share some of the costs and move to a model where they buy into or some of the investment there. These are just options, again, not our recommendations. We haven't identified any technical issues with the BCP as presented by the governor, but again, we are concerned that these additional functions haven't been contemplated in the 12-13 budget, and we think it is important that the board start to take on some of these functions and activities in the budget year, given the context of adult realignment. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? If not, I think we should move on and hear from the next panel. You know, did Cal-Ema want to add anything? You don't have to. I just wondered.
I'm actually not from Cal-Ema. I'm sorry. I'm also from the Correction Standards Authority, Yvonne Garner.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Yeah.
just address a couple of things that were mentioned by the LAO as Cal-Ema joins us. Part of it is the reason that we didn't add resources other than some administrative functions and transferring resources from Cal-Ema to administer the grant programs was because with the new department and new executive director, we knew that there would be some opportunity for them to come and relook at existing operations. When we speak of the high vacancy rate, it is a high rate for CSA, primarily because they're currently under the umbrella of CDCR, which has been under the hiring freeze. So those are just a couple things I wanted to point out. We just recently learned of some of the recommendations and alternatives in redirecting staff from DOJ. Not something that we would support. DOJ is the repository of a lot of data sets, and we think that they are still probably the appropriate entity to gather that information. Local law enforcement, local government entities are used to accessing that data and providing that data to DOJ. We're not certain that that's a reasonable approach to consider at this time. I think some of the, as you know, we continue to support the $10 million in planning grants. We continue to support the $8.9 million in CCP money that is a one-time appropriation in the current year to continue the efforts of AB 109 realignment implementation from last year, and the $20 million related to the pharmacy augmentation that is for the Receivers Medical Services Program budget. Those are all things we continue to support. So just as we go forward, if those things are considered, we just wanted to make sure that you knew our position.
Thank you. I hope that you'll consider some of these things, because to set up this new entity that is going to be so key to the success of realignment and not adequately fund it, even though we're funding all these other pieces, might be foolish.
Right. And I think some of that, if I just may, is addressed by the vacancies that currently exist at CSA, and what we thought maybe the executive director would consider as they came forward were the positions that we have in place right now still appropriate given the new mission and role of the Board of State and Community Corrections. So we think that some of that may be addressed relatively soon and may not require additional resources, at least in the immediate future.
Okay. Well, this is something that we'll watch. I don't know if Kalima, did you want?
Sorry, I'm late to the party, Madam Chair. Brendan Murphy with Callie May. And I'd just like to reiterate that our staffs have worked tirelessly to make sure that these grant programs that are transferring from us transfer in as smooth a manner as possible. And you know, the timing of it is clearly, as you said, July really is not that far away. Yeah. And we have been hand in hand working since before the governor's budget came out to make sure that we have as smooth a transition as possible with finance and CSA.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, can I just have some clarification on the recommendation of staff? The items that finance suggested, are we agreeing with those? Are we? There were three. I'm unclear.
Thank you. Did you have more?
I'm fine, thanks.
Okay, good.
I want to hear the next panel.
All right, yes. We'd like to move on to the next panel. Thank you all very much. And we'd like to welcome Sharon Angst in a new role with California Forward, and Kathy Jett, Elizabeth Howard Espinoza from CSAT, and Karen Pank from the Chief Probation Officers. Welcome to the committee. We're very interested in your comments on BSCC, the new proposal.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Sharon Angst. I'm the Director of the Partnership for Community Excellence, which is a part of California Forward. We're very interested in this discussion because what we're currently doing are many of the things that the new board would be taking on. And in fact, we came about doing this simply because there really was a void. And we're happy, we're hoping that we'll be able to work with the board and to be able to support the board. And if, in fact, the board could take over what we're doing, that would be also a very good thing. We think it's a really clearly a good function for state government to have to organize this. We launched this in really last May as California Forward was engaging with a number of folks around the framework that they have developed or we've developed. We were working with a number of different folks out in the community and hearing the message that there really was a void in this. So as a result, California Forward tried to ask folks who would be the right entity to do this. And people were saying, we're just overloaded. And so that's why California Forward took this over for at least the near future. And I think that through all the consultation that we did with folks, our role really has been to try to connect the dots, bring people together, make sure everybody knows what's going on, try to reduce the chance for duplication. There's only so many resources to go around, and to think that we might end up two organizations doing the same thing would be a woeful waste of resources. We did get funding from the Stephen Bechtel Fund in Irvine for our project that we're doing. And I want to touch on just a few things. I think that, one of the things that California Forward has been most concerned about, and I think that most people would agree on at this point, is that we, as a system, for any kind of process that would be done, developing a vision and the outcomes that you want is the first thing that you have to do. If you don't have a clear vision, whatever it is you're getting isn't going to do a whole lot of good. Also, being able to then to get to the outcomes and measure those are really important. You have to be able to develop a plan that really speaks to that vision and those outcomes, and invest in the models and the practices and the programs that have been shown to work to make that happen. I want to point out, too, though, that there are not evidence-based practices for every single thing to be done. So we don't want to get in a position where the best is the enemy of the good. And there's a number of promising kinds of things that go on in California that probation chiefs have instituted and others in other areas that are really important that we should take note of and not get into a position where if you do not do one of these five, then therefore you cannot be successful. However, the important part is that you got to collect your data and you got to know if the thing is working. We know that in some cases, things that we have done, and I have done throughout my career, have made things worse, certainly not better. And so certainly if we're investing funds into things that make things worse, that would be probably the worst scenario you could imagine. So I believe from our perspective, what's really important then is how do you really look at success with realignment? How do you look at success within a county? And having that data available and investing in infrastructure for that data is really key. That allows you then to engage in quality improvement. Many people think of quality improvement as being more of a healthcare notion. Quality improvement can be applied to anything, and it's simply looking at your data and your results and saying something's not working, we need to tweak this, we go back and we just continue to refine and refine as we go. And if in fact we find that something's making things worse, it's time to start over. That's talking about a serious kind of, let's look at another way to accomplish the goal. And there are a number of ways to do that. So I think the important points that I really want to get at, particularly around the data, is research, as LAO's pointed out as well. That with this particular, the realignment in itself is one of the few that, at least I've been told, that has had no research money put behind it to really look at whether or not the outcomes that we desire as a state are really going to be achieved. I think Joan Petersilia has talked about that with a number of people, and if we aren't putting any kind of money into that kind of research to look at the effects of this and whether or not it does improve the criminal justice system and public safety, then we've spent a lot of time and money to get nowhere. That also then goes to the issue of data. And if the researchers don't have the data, if they can't get to the data, and then that's going to be a problem. On the other hand, the counties, as I'm sure that Karen Elizabeth will talk a lot about, there's great variability in their ability to generate this kind of data. Finding out from one county, for instance, that they couldn't even, with the money they received, public funds, couldn't even hire probation officers that makes it very difficult then to think that you're going to have any infrastructure to do much beyond that. So we have to recognize that you have such capacities that vary, I think, between all these counties. And where you do end up is kind of at the lowest common denominator based on what the counties that have the least infrastructure can actually do. So I don't think it's a black and white kind of thing. It's like trying to find a way to be able to get the kind of information, data, and such that we need to be able to accomplish the goal, but understanding that making demands of counties that have absolutely no funding for this or any kind of infrastructure to deliver on it is a serious problem. So having that investment up front in research, data, that sort of thing is a key, I think, to anything that we're trying to accomplish here. I believe the counties are going to need substantial assistance, and I think that that should be based on what they specifically need request, as opposed to the state saying this is how you should do it and this is what we're going to demand be done. Every county is different, as everyone has talked about today, and it's really important that they're able to own this for themselves and to be able to do what they believe, find out, what is the outcome they really are looking for and how to achieve that, and that we all support that process and providing what they need. And with that, I will stop. Thank you very much.
Do you want to go? That's fine. First. Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Elizabeth Howard Espinosa on behalf of the California State Association of Counties. Certainly at your discretion, I was asked to talk about a couple other things in addition to data, and I can perhaps wait until Ms. Pink makes her comment.
We're interested in just really looking at this new board as a great opportunity. So we're interested in any of your comments.
Just sort of as a broad statement, CSAC and counties generally, I think, have a very strong relationship and partnership. We've worked very well with the Board of Corrections in when that was the body, and then the Correction Standards Authority, and I think we're very supportive of the movement toward the new Board of State and Community Corrections. We recognize that there probably is some work that we need to do in continuing that tight state-county partnership and building the mission and the goals and the objectives. I think we see this as an important supporter of our overall goal, which is making sure that counties are as successful as possible in taking on the new responsibilities under 2011 realignment. It certainly will. The BSCC will continue to maintain other functions and responsibilities that are important to us now on training and in terms of setting up standards for detention facilities. So it has a lot of the board will be challenged to continue to do everything that it's doing now and these new responsibilities, but we support the efforts in building the capacity of the BSCC to be a partner with counties as we move forward and to help us collect best practices. On the data piece in particular, we've been working collaboratively, as Mr. Takeshita spoke to you about, in identifying data elements that we can guarantee counties across the state can collect. We're trying to be smart about this. Data is one of those issues where it seems like it might be easy, but when you get into it, the devil is in the details. We have to be sure that counties are defining variables in the same way. There are some complexities with the population and under whose jurisdiction it is and where that population is at a particular point in time, and we have to be careful so that we know counties are approaching data collection and identifying variables in the same way. Generally speaking, we view that it is not only our responsibility, but really a benefit to counties to report and be very transparent about data. We think we have a story to tell, and we think we have an obligation to the policymakers and to the taxpayers, quite frankly, to say what we're doing. What are we doing to deliver better outcomes for our communities, for our offenders, for other programs and services that touch the criminal justice system, such as child welfare services and foster care. The benefits are going to be mutual across systems, but it's very complex and it's hard to do. Counties do, as Sharon mentioned, have different capacities, and quite frankly, we did appreciate the feature of realignment that said we're giving you a set of responsibilities and a set of money to do it, and it didn't come with not that we're not willing to report it, but a lot of administrative responsibilities and reporting back. So it's a delicate balance, and we're going to have to work hard to identify the type of information and the expectations about what we will report, and it needs to be doable and reasonable and not burdensome across 58 counties. We don't want the data collection piece, while very important, to hamper or interfere with our immediate needs, which is implementing the programs and services so we can do a better job with the offenders. Again, we think that the board has an important role. We're going to be there at the table as a partner and trying to help shape and define what that role is. I have some comments and a couple other points, but I think for purposes of kind of moving the conversation along, perhaps I'll pass it along to Karen, and then I can loop back to the other things I wanted to talk about.
Okay. I think I can safely say good afternoon, committee. My name is Karen Pank. I'm the Executive Director of the Chief Probation Officers of California. I'm pleased to be here to talk to you about what I think is probably one of the real hope and opportunity wrapped up in realignment that kind of takes this idea of local and state partnership and collaboration and move away from kind of the state bureaucracy, and then the locals have their own 58 different bureaucracies. And so I think we look at this board as being that possibility. And I open in that way because we really probably didn't know exactly what we envisioned for that board when we asked for it to be included as a part of realignment. We felt it was important to have an independent board that really wasn't wrapped up in just the state has a large mission in and of itself within corrections to handle the population and run their correctional system, that to also look at statewide strategic criminal justice planning policy really belonged in a different setting. And so we think we hope that's what the new board, once it's formed and the executive director is appointed, will be able to do. Some of the comments earlier, I would agree, we are watching what the May revise might bring forward as far as funding and other directives for the board, because currently, we're looking at just moving the current responsibilities from the other two entities over and matching those resources, which is a pretty large mission that we would support continuing. But there's a lot of things being looked at for this board to be, and we would caution it can't be everything to everybody, not to put everything but the kitchen sink in it, because we don't want to overload it and then it can't be successful at doing the things that I think we hope it will be, which is fostering that collaboration to help provide counties the technical assistance needed to be successful in realignment. And one of the things that we have seen happen since realignment took place is that conversation between state and locals really being enhanced because of the need. It was an aggressive timeline with realignment. We had to rely on each other, and we really have been able to do that. But to set up a system to ensure that that continues is going to be important, and we would argue should be one of the main missions of the board. As we talk about measurements, data, outcomes, which I think, as you all know, at least from a probation standpoint, we very much believe in. We think that really puts together a roadmap as to how to do our business. We would kind of maybe caution some of the conversation which talks about measuring county to county, taking data from county A to county B, what's good, what's bad, but really look more to the Washington State Policy Institute model, which is looking at what works. What works? One thing may work well in Yolo County, but the entire system may be suffering from something else that's completely out of our control. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something valuable to take from a county, share amongst all the other counties, so that then Alameda can try to adapt it to make it work for that county. And I think that's the opportunity with this board, and that's one of the things we have to. It helps us with the balance too of oversight versus collaboration. We don't really see this board as oversight, but we see it as an important partnership with the state, and so we'd like to talk about those mission developments as we we go along. But technical assistance would certainly be our number one priority for this board. The sharing of information, ensuring that it has the support, both fiscal as well as policy support needed to accomplish everything that we're hoping that it does, and to manage those expectations. As we are entering this new era of realignment, we need to be sure that we are doing it in a very planned out manner, and really looking at it to do some statewide strategic planning, I think, would be a good use of the board's first kind of foray into this area. I'm not sure that some of the work being done currently by CSA to develop the mission for the new board, I think, as you alluded to, Senator Hancock, makes the most sense in our opinion, because we don't know what the board might look like, and we don't know what the new mission should be, but we think the new board should have a strong role in developing that. So while time is short and we're very concerned about that, we know CSA and CalEMA have been working really diligently to at least get those pieces that we know are just moving. But as far as mission and so forth, we would hope that would be left to the new board. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Okay, thank you. Two other items that are mentioned on page 9 of your agenda have to do with the Community Correction Partnership Planning Grants as well as the statewide training funds. And I just wanted to talk briefly about those. First, to recognize and acknowledge our appreciation for the administration, the governor, and the legislature's support in recognizing that counties really needed assistance in taking on, and you have all heard this, as we've traveled the state over the last year or so, but the most significant correctional policy change in decades and probably a whole generation. What counties are undergoing right now at a time when they're taking on a new responsibility, trying to manage that population within the structures that they have available to them, but recognizing that over the long term, they're really going to have to evolve and develop a different way of doing business. We need the support to encourage the systemic change that we're going to need at the local level to really do a good job over time with these new populations. So the Community Corrections Partnership Grants were part of the overall budget that supported realignment last year, and those were intended, they're a fixed amount of money that go out to counties depending on its size. And what they do is they help the process of bringing the community correction partnership stakeholders together to put a plan together. And the timeline that we faced last year with the late June passage of the budget, although we knew that AB 109 was already part of the, in the works and recognized as a new statutory organization, but the funding didn't come through until June. Counties had about 3 months before the population came to them, so they had a relatively short period of time to put together their initial plan. In many counties, it was a triage plan. We know these folks are coming. What are we going to do? What systems are we going to have in place? But over time, we really need to evolve those plans, and they're going to look differently in year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5. So I think it's important to recognize that those planning grants shouldn't be one time. They should certainly, in these early years, continue to support the important multi-jurisdictional stakeholder process at the local level to develop a community plan that's reflective not only of the individual county's current capacity, but where they want to move over time. Just some examples of what counties have used the money for. They've used them to send their community correction partnership folks to trainings, to site visits, to examine other counties' strategies and best practices, to do data analysis, or to bring someone on to look at the data and what is already being collected and how they can leverage that data to examine the population that they'll be taking on, to do gap analysis, and then some consulting services and facilitative services, bringing that group together, the local public safety stakeholders together, sometimes benefited from bringing another party into the room and helping them identify their mission, their goal, and their objectives in both the short and the long term. And then on the training side, there is money currently available to support a collaborative effort among sheriffs, probation chiefs, and counties that is allowing us on a statewide basis to do, kind of in this first run, more of the nuts and bolts. What is AB 109? What is it not? what are some of the transitional and process issues that we needed to work out in collaboration with CDCR. But over time, we're going to need to, again, get to this system change, and where do we want to end up, and what are the practices that are going to allow counties to be successful. So we thank the administration for including both the training and the CCP planning grants in the budget, and we do think that an inclusion of a second round of funding will be important in ensuring county success going forward.
Thank you.
And if I could just add CPOC's support of that as well. I think one of the things that I do at times hear frustration at the state level about, well, what is happening? How can are we just letting time go by and there's not a lot of planning? And because you're talking, I'm sure, to your locals, there's a lot going on, and these funds really do support that. And it is a real nice transition as you're waiting for maybe the board to kind of now come in and take that role, as California Forward was talking about a void. Well, the void isn't as big as one might think because there are a lot of efforts going on. And in light of realignment, meaning that the counties are supposed to step up and make some decisions that are appropriate for their counties, these funds are an enormous help to ensure that everybody is getting to that place. And so we have jointly pulled together a lot of different trainings and have documented those in quarterly reports to the CSA. So if you would have interest in knowing what some of those things are, they are there at the state level, and we can provide those to you in more detail. I won't bore you with them at this juncture, but there is support there, I think, to show that there's an ongoing need for it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Did you have a question?
I do. I thought I heard you say, Sharon, that there's no research money up front.
Yes, that's my understanding, is that the bill didn't allow for a specific amount of money to be set aside for research.
Okay, and I'd like to hear from the Department of Finance whether there's any proposal to allow that to happen.
It's correct that the bill did not include specific research funding, but the CSA did have 2 research positions, and they do have resources in addition for research within their existing structure that will move to the board. Those positions, of course, had done something different in the past, but it's very possible that they could be directed to comply with the new missions of the board. So there are 2 positions and some additional resources for research.
All right.
And the question would be whether or not those 2 positions would be actually conducting the research, or if there would be funding available to contract with those universities that really know this area very well and would be able to provide that kind of research that would be highly credible and very helpful, I think, to the state in determining the outcomes.
Would we have budget language that would reflect that? Would the governor propose that?
I think the board will have some flexibility in how they do the research, and as we're discussing here today, I think it's really important that we relook at what we envisioned when we created the board, and maybe there are some areas that we need to relook at and reconsider in the May revision, and I think that we heard that, and we'll take that into consideration.
Okay. So in other words, there could be language giving the flexibility to do it in-house or to contract with the university, because we're very fortunate in California to have some researchers that have been diligently at work on this for a number of years, and also then can help broadly disseminate the data and have a lot of credibility. So it's a good, interesting idea. And I think it's good that finance is here and we can all learn from each other at a session like this.
Certainly, and the former Board of Corrections and even CSA had contracted with outside entities in the past, so this will not be an unfamiliar concept.
If I might add, Senator Hancock, I also think the researchers that we do have in California are extraordinary. And those researchers are also very good at being able to take research and apply it at a practical level. For instance, Joan Pierre-Celia working with Santa Clara County, and other researchers have been working with other counties, including Fresno County. So those are, I think that's so key. And we also know that when funding occurs, that is always the first thing that gets cut.
Sure.
And I think we would argue, at least in what we hear from folks, is that if that does happen, then what would occur is we really don't know if things have been implemented or we're getting the outcomes that we need. So just to reiterate that point.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all very much. At this point, are there comments from the public on either of these two topics, juvenile justice realignment or the creation of the new board?
Senator Hancock, I don't want to take advantage of the fact that I'm sitting in the seat, but just very quickly, I wanted to reiterate that CSAC is opposed to the closure of DJJ. Many of the themes that came out in the panels that spoke to you are issues that we have concerns with, particularly the specialized needs of this population, and we frankly don't feel like pushing the limited number who have very high behavioral, mental health, and treatment needs makes a lot of sense. We don't have the economy of scale to do it, and we have very strong policy that encourages the state to maintain a responsibility on the juvenile justice continuum. Thank you.
Thank you. So, welcome to the committee. There are quite a number of people wanting to comment, so we're asking that you keep your comments to 2 minutes and play off what you've heard already. Tell us.
Craig Brown for the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. We urge you to reject the governor's proposal on juvenile justice. Just a couple points. What you're talking about is 2 out of 1,000 young people that go through the juvenile justice system. 998 are not handled by DJJ. The 997 of them are probably handled locally, and 1 might make it to state prison. On the point of what happens to these young people, of the juvenile court ones who are now going through juvenile court and ending up in DJJ, they're going to end up, we agree with Mr. Steinhardt, they're going to end up, the vast majority of them are going to go to state prison for very long times. Of the ones that the analyst recommends, the ones sentenced to prison and through adult court and retained in the juvenile system, we have a lot of experience with that. Those inmates were placed at the Hatchby a few years ago to deal with the ones that the analyst is now recommending be retained at the local level. They were placed at the Hatchby, a level 4 maximum security prison operated by Department of Corrections, and they literally tore the place up and destroyed it. These are incredibly challenging young people. They know they're facing a long time in prison. They are going to be a real pistol for whoever handles them. The last thing you want to do is disperse them among the counties. And lastly, I'd make a little plea to you. The people left serving these kids at DJJ are incredibly dedicated to what they do. They're people who could have got better jobs in corrections, could have brought stability to their lives by leaving and transferring to the Department of Corrections on the adult side. They've stayed in juvenile because they want to work with kids. They need stability. Farrell has worked. Almost the entire remedial problem is solved, except that created by instability. What's happened to the system is the staff are constantly moved, the wards are constantly moved. The instability is simply making it hard to deal with violence. Violence needs to come down in these facilities. There'll be less lockdown. There'll be less isolation. There'll be less all the things you don't want to happen. But they need stability. What they need is people to say, we're leaving you alone. Go do your job. And we'd urge you that whatever decision you make at the end of this budget cycle, you'll leave it in place for a few years, let people adjust to it, bring stability to the system, and let people do what they're trained to do instead of constantly being relocated.
Thank you.
Jolena Vorse with the Urban Counties Caucus, also here in opposition to the shift of DJJ to counties. In a quick survey I did among my members, even the Bay Area counties, as is mentioned, they don't have the beds. They have beds, but they don't have the beds for serious and violent youth. And so it's not only a capacity issue and a bed issue, it's the fact that they also don't have the programs for these type of serious and violent youth. And so we'd ask at this time to reject the proposal. We look forward to seeing more details from the administration and Mayor Rivas. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. Corey Salzillo on behalf of the California District Attorneys Association. We'd echo all the comments regarding opposition to the closure of DJJ. I can tell you with certainty, not to the level of guessing that the analysts talked about, there will be more direct filing on juvenile offenders. There just simply will have to be, because we are eliminating a very important dispositional option. We also have to remember that getting rid of DJJ disrupts a continuum, and you have to look at juvenile justice as a continuum from the county to the state. And when you take that last option away, you have to remember that we don't send kids to DJJ just because we like to or because it's, you know, the easiest thing to do. A lot of times it's the last option on the table, that they will be through probation and they'll fail out and go back to probation and fail out, and finally when there's nothing else that can be done, DJJ is the last option available. So we have to think about it in that context. And as to the savings, somebody pointed out that we're just shifting line items here because of the direct filing. We're going to pay for these people through the adult system rather than the juvenile system, and it may not save any money. And further, this budget proposal doesn't save any money because, as we're understanding it, the savings from closing DJJ are redirected to local governments to supervise the population, so it doesn't even really save the state money. On the issue of the Board and State Community Corrections, we would just note that there is not a prosecutor member on this. There are 2 sheriffs, 2 probation chiefs, a judge, a police chief, and a county supervisor, but no district attorney. And when this board was first conceived as the successor agency to the CSA and the Board of Corrections, that was probably appropriate. But given the fact that there are now serious functions that affect prosecutors, CalGRIP, the CalEMA grants, the Burn JAG grants, realignment planning, and juvenile justice, we would think it's appropriate for a DA. So we're going to be pushing for that as the process moves. Thank you.
Janice Norman on behalf of the American Federation of State County Municipal Employees. We are also opposed to the realignment proposal as relates to the closure of Division of Juvenile Justice. We have the pleasure of representing the psychologists, clinical social workers, both at the state level but also at the county level. And we can attest within our